We're back on Locked On Coyotes with the Arizona Coyotes season now over. It is time to begin our season and review series of the show. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the three things that went wrong for Arizona. What do you think went wrong? We're going to talk about that on today's episode of Locked On Coyotes.
You're Locked On Coyotes, your daily podcast on the Arizona Coyotes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of Locked On Coyotes, brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for a $20 off your first purchase. I'm Robyn Leonio. That's Carl Pavlak right beside me. We want to thank everyone for making this show your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get to our season in review, Carl. Arizona Coyotes finished not as bad as we thought. It's still a lottery team, but that's obviously what we expected. But not as bad as we thought.
Yeah, going into it, a lot of people looked at the Coyotes roster and thought that it was going to be one of the worst teams in the history of the cap. It was not. I think a lot of that to do is, people were looking at last year. There's always a question of if player success is going to continue. It's Lawson Krause, Clayton Keller, those kind of players going to do the same thing that they did last year. Are rookies like Barrett Hayton going to step up? What about Jack McBain? Matias Michelli wasn't really someone anyone could plan for. And yeah, those players took necessary steps, and it was not the worst team in cap history. It was not the worst team this season. There were plenty of worse teams. I don't think the Coyotes can be the worst team without doing like serious destruction at this point.
Absolutely. Arizona ended up finishing sixth from the bottom with a record of 28, 40, and 14 for 70 points, Carl, which I think we had at the beginning of the year, we did a over-under on point totals. I believe it was, what did we say, 63 and a half or something like that, maybe like 62, and we're like, no, it's gonna be under than that. But they ended up going well over that to 70. So I mean, I give them credit for improving a lot this year. But despite improving, Carl, lots of issues that this Arizona Coyotes team still faced, and we're gonna get to those. And let's start with this first one. This team was a very poorly disciplined team. Took way too many penalties.
Yes, they were not the most penalized team in the NHL. That was the Ottawa Senators. They are the fourth most penalized team in terms of net penalties. Penalties they took versus penalties taken by other teams against them. They were the worst. Just way too undisciplined. I think a special note needs to go to the too many men on the ice penalty, which was a constant problem throughout the season.
Yeah, those are like simple. That's like, for example, too many men in the ice is a simple fundamental like error that like you need to figure out. I say that as someone who has been called on that on my own team when playing hockey. It happens, but at the NHL level, like if it happens once, like okay, it happens, but it happens so many times, there's something wrong.
I mean, let's look at the fact that the roster definitely overperformed, but there's still a very either young or not skilled team that leads to penalties. They also didn't necessarily have the chance to practice all that much. Like the Coyotes went on some monster road trips Like that is going to hurt your ability to,
I don't
you
think
know,
they believed in practicing.
yeah. It definitely like there are reasons why, but like you kind of need the team to eventually figure that thing out.
Yeah, I'm looking at right now. Their average age this year, by the way, was 26.3.
Dang, that is very young, and you know we see this a lot, like especially with older guys. The Coyotes had a couple. You get beat on the play, you take a dumb penalty to prevent a goal from being scored, or just overall lack of discipline in the offensive zone. Um, it was pretty much a constant problem throughout the year.
Yeah, and and like we said with that with that youth, you're gonna expect stuff like that. But you'd also hope with the coaching that it's just like you over time it becomes less and less prevalent.
Yeah,
And like it slowly did, but it still was an issue. They still like kept popping up.
down to the very
Um,
last game. Yes,
yes.
it's. I mean, it's going to be Bears' third year next season. Hopefully, it gets better then. Hopefully, as the roster gets more skilled, they're not getting beat as much. They take fewer penalties. Hopefully, they can practice more. They get more disciplined. Take fewer too many men on the ice because it was just a killer. Like looking at the other teams, the Ottawa Senators and Florida Panthers are also highly penalized, but it's not really the same thing. They can overcome those penalties in a way that the Coyotes cannot, and both teams drew like a lot more penalties too. So they were penalized, but they were drawing penalties too.
Yeah, exactly. So like so you look at essentially the ratio, like the ratio of it, like it really hit in that way. The Coyotes need, like, that's one thing they need to focus on. Need to focus on that. We'll see what coaching is in terms of discipline throughout the off season. What certain players do. Maybe they work on that confidence and not needing to take dumb penalties or really avoiding the too many men as you talked about. But you also talked about you also mentioned that other teams were drawing penalties, and that was one thing that ended up leading up to special teams as well, right? So we'll get to that in a little bit, but kind of give you kind of to get in every idea. There's that two sided things. You take penalties, but you also draw penalties. When you take them, you're on the kill. When you draw them and you're on you get on that power play. The Coyotes had some issues with both of them, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. But first, a quick word from our sponsors on the show.
When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could handpick the best stars for your business team? If you're building your talent roster, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. You don't have to spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills. You can do that all with Indeed. You can find the talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like matching, assessments, and virtual interviews. And do you hate waiting? Indeed's US data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resumes on Indeed match the job descriptions the moment they sponsor a job. When you sponsor on Indeed post, you are 3 times more likely to get a hire, according to Indeed research. And the right candidate is doing everything they can to find you. And if you use Indeed, you can make sure you're doing everything you can to find them. Indeed knows when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must have job requirements. You can visit indeed.com/locked on to start hiring now. Just go to indeed.com/locked on. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
So let's continue, Carl, talking about the issues the Coyotes had, and I talk and I teed it up talking about the penalties. With the penalties being an issue, uh, special teams was also a problem. If they're on the power play wasn't great. But let's start with penalty kill because it kind of gives a perfect segue from penalties because the penalty kill was very very lackluster.
Yep. Ranked 27th in the league with a 74.6% kill um, rating.
Yeah, it wasn't good.
Yeah.
And like you are gonna expect something like that to happen when you are a team that's more heavily penalized.
Yes.
But also, likewise, some of the better teams out there can be one. Let's say we have a team that's the most penalized team, because let's say they're just a very physical team, so they get a lot of penalties. But that team can also have one of the best penalty kills because, well, they have the talent for it. The
Yep.
Coyotes, I mean, I'm not saying that they don't, but they don't.
Yeah, like I mentioned, the Tampa Bay Lightning are a team that took more penalties than the Coyotes.
hmm
They not only have the roster to kind of like overcome a deficit if it happens, but just in terms of their penalty kill, they were at 15th in the league, which still not great, not one of the top, but it's makes a big difference. The Coyotes gave up a lot of power play goals. It really affected them because they also take penalties at the worst possible moments. We talked about like Coyotes score a goal, take a penalty, other team is able to even things up. That happened a lot. Coyotes give up a goal, take a penalty, other team compounds their lead. Happened a lot.
It did, and you know, I have to think about um, a team that would allow opportunities like that. And it goes back to what we're talking about. It's the youth, right? That's part of it. It's a young team, but this is also the NHL. You there are expectations, and um, you know, to be able to take penalties is one thing, but you know, penalty kills are what usually what in the 80% not to like that's probably like what some of the like average the high end right in the high 80s for effectiveness.
Um, the most effective penalty kill was the Boston Bruins with an 87.3%.
There you go, right. That I was right on there, so 87%, I think. Wow, so maybe the average is around like 83, 84%. um
Looks like this season it was actually like a lot of power play goals. So I would say like high 70s, low 80s was the average. The
hmm
Coyotes were definitely way lower than that in the low 70s.
yeah, low 70s is something that is, to me, that's unacceptable. Like you want to be right around the average, at the very least, especially if you're a team that's going to take that many penalties.
Yeah,
It's like, yeah, sure, that's fine, but you got to kill. You got to have the personnel that can kill off a penalty.
absolutely. And they don't have that. I think they need to work on getting defensemen because defensemen, I don't think they necessarily had the best killing defensemen this season.
No, and they didn't. Well, and they let's be honest. Through especially the latter part of the season, towards the end of the season, not much of defense as a whole.
Yeah, you give up Nick Bukestad, who was great on the penalty kill. Um, Shane Gostisbehere was also, I believe, a big time killer.
hmm
Uh, Chikrin wasn't utilized on the kill very much because they were wanted to boost his numbers. So
Right.
um, I, I do think that there are tweaks that they can make, but I also wonder if it's a system issue because it could be both. I'm not sure. I am not a penalty kill expert, so I haven't broken it down yet. But at some point, something's got to give.
Yeah. And we talked about Special teams, penalty kill a little bit less. We talked about power play last season and how egregious the power play was. Um, you know, I think you and I had a lot of hope. I think when the Coyotes brought in more assistant coaches or new assistant coaches, one of which that was known for a little more special teams work, especially. So like I had hope, Carl, that the Coyotes special teams as a whole, penalty kill and power play, would improve a decent amount. I wouldn't say greatly, but a decent amount, a noticeable amount. I thought they did, especially on the power play at the beginning of the year. Like I think they had a really good power play at the beginning of the year, and then we dropped back off and went back to okay, this is what it was like last year. So
Yeah.
what's the issue?
I will say this. You are right. They definitely had a much better power play to start the season. Everyone seemed to figure him out, though. Last season, they finished with 16.6% success on the power play. This past season, it was 18.9. They went from being third worst to 24th in the league. So that is a step. They're
It's
at
an
least
improvement.
moving in the
It
right
is an
direction.
improvement. I think a lot of that probably goes with some of the personnel having career years,
Yes.
and taking advantage on the power play. Uh, but that's that I mean you would expect you would hope something would be the case right that of that right of a player having a career year, stats elsewhere are going to start rising a little bit as team stats.
Yeah. And you would also hope that with next season, with like the addition of like Dylan Gunther full time, potentially Logan Cooley, we're gonna see that continue to rise. I am less concerned with the power play than I am with the penalty kill. The power play was still not great, but it is improving in a way that the penalty kill I feel kind of stagnated.
Yes. I think even the penalty kill as compared to last year might have even taken a slight step back.
Let me pull up last year's number.
Because I felt like there were a lot more issues this year. I mean, I could be wrong.
So last season, 74.8% killed. They were 29th in the league. So definitely killed more penalties last year than they did this year. But they're higher in the standings, so I kind of consider that a wash. It at least is not a step in the right direction. It's more of a stagnant.
It's a sidestep.
Yeah,
It's just like they changed something, but it didn't work.
yeah. And a lot of teams got worse than them. So that's kind of something. If a bunch of people are dropping and you stay the same, like I'm not gonna knock that. You didn't get worse, especially as you know we saw an increase in scoring this season.
Exactly. Well, there's still one more thing that we had to discuss on three things that went wrong for the Arizona Coyotes this season. We'll go ahead and wrap up our conversation in just a moment. But first, a quick word from our sponsors on the show. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. I don't know about you guys, but I always have an issue when I'm trying to buy sports tickets online or just event tickets online, and high prices are on the resale market, especially, are just absolutely I feel like they're killing me. It all changed when I discovered the Gametime app. I got a chance to get some amazing deals off their flash deals and last minute tickets that were able to get amazingly low prices for great locations. I was able to get Diamondback tickets right along the baseline for really, really cheap. And Gametime was the best place to find it. I was able to see exactly where I was going to sit before I bought the ticket, just to see how comfortable I would be or how the sight lines, I should say. So absolutely love Game Time and the way they actually help you find your seats and make sure you can get them for the lowest possible deals. You can snag tickets without the stress on Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code Locked On NHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So let's finish off, Carl. And I'll turn to you. What you got to get? Let's get it. I mean, get kind of switch things up. Let's get you to tee it up.
Sure. So, we've talked about penalties, we've talked about special teams. 5-on-5 play is still a vital area of hockey. It's when most of the game is played. And a problem that I've seen with the Coyotes this year was the lack of secondary scoring. You had that top line, Clayton Keller, Nick Schmaltz, Barrett Hayton there for a significant chunk. I thought that line did really well. You got your second line, Lawson Krause, Matthias Michelli, Nick Bugstad, Jack McBain, kind of split, I think, pretty evenly between those two.
Yeah.
But beyond that, not too much. So we got a 35 goal season from Keller. We got a 20 plus goal season from Lawson Krause. Nick Schmaltz, how many did he have?
Nick Schmaltz had
22.
There we go.
But beyond that, like it's a pretty decent drop. Barrett Hayton, 19. Credit to the kid. But the team needs more offense. They were one of the least offensive teams in the league, and you can't just rely on the top line for everything.
Yeah. And here's the thing, and I'm going to make a comparison. It's going to be an unfair comparison, but I'm still going to make it. You look at as much as we're going to go praise Clayton Keller, for example, for being for tying the most points in Coyotes history for a single season. That 80 some odd points is still not a lot. Still not would not even be close to the top three for a playoff team.
Yeah. It's I mean, this was a year scoring was up. There was multiple 100-point players.
Mm-hmm.
Could Keller hit 100 points with a consistent line? Maybe. I think it's definitely within the realm of possibilities. But even with that, like you shut down the Keller line, you just have to shut down Krause.
Outside of that, it's it's like what you're going to rely on, Liam O'Brien or like Zach Cassian to do any scoring, like.
And blue line especially, like I thought JJ Mosier, Yusuf Almaki had great seasons for
100%.
younger players, but they're not like they didn't even have 10 goals each. Like no Coyote player at the end of the season had 10 goals, or no Coyote defenseman at the end of the season had 10 goals. That's not good enough.
Yeah, especially now that we're starting to see a lot more puck moving defensemen, puck moving offensive defensemen out there.
Yeah.
And yeah, sure, you can have stay at home defensemen, true defensemen that live up to their names. But you look at other defensemen. There are defensemen out there that get like 100-point seasons.
Yeah.
Those are like complete outliers. So I'm not going to say, hey, Coyotes, go get yourself a 100-point scoring defenseman.
Yeah.
But at least one that can do a little more work. Someone that can help supplement the offense.
And it should be noted that you had the 1-2 punch of Jacob Chikrin, Shane Gostisbehere. So I get not having it because you trade your two best defensemen.
Right.
But I also don't necessarily think that Mosier or Valimaki, who again I was impressed by, are going to be like
they're like you can't have them your 1 and 2 defensemen next year. I mean, we'll break that down even more in depth later in our off-season series. But you just cannot do that. They like, are they good? Yes, they're they're like second pairing D-men at best.
Yeah. And I do think if we can get like a good season out of, um, you know, Dylan Gunther next season, that that is going to go a long way. But the Coyotes need more scoring. It's kind of how you win hockey games. You score more goals than the other team.
It's a great. It is an amazing concept, isn't it?
It's so simple, but like ultimately, like that's what you do. Like there's a lot that goes into hockey, but you need to score more goals than the other people.
Exactly. But you're right. You have to see the secondary scoring go up, and we didn't. Um, but there's a chance that things could be different next year. There are a decent amount of players who aren't rostered or aren't on their contract past next year, so it's hard to tell exactly what the team will be.
Yeah, but
But
yeah. And there's a chance that like Nick Schmaltz is no longer your top line wing. Like you move him down, and then you have like a little bit more danger there. Um, if Gunther is really able to take that next step, if Cooley's able to, if Cooley signs with the team and does that, like you could get secondary scoring that way by adding offense and just moving everyone down. But I'm not sure if that's what the team is going to do.
long term, they you know they have to really. That's what they have to think about. They have to think long term. Um, you know, and you can inject Gunther into Cooley in there, but uh, but past that, what else are you gonna do?
In order to win, like you need four lines, and the Coyotes have one and a half, two at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm a fan of that saying that you need four lines on like all the time. Um, uh, it's a thing that the best hockey teams out there, like you see a fourth line on a Stanley Cup team, you know, do be almost just as important as the top six.
Absolutely.
That said, anything that you want to close things off on?
Uh, I do think that these are pretty big problems for the Coyotes, but not necessarily things that can't be overcome. Like
Right.
these are expected problems for a rebuild.
For a rebuilding team, especially, right? Like uh, it's you look at where the Coyotes were last year, and you look at where they were, um, you know, in the previous year. Yes, they kind of were on the bubble and whatever. That was a weird year, but I feel like they are. It's inching. I wouldn't say trending, but inching towards the right direction.
Absolutely.
Anyways, though, that's going to be it for today's episode of the Locked On Coyotes podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to leave a review, like, comment, subscribe if you have yet to already. We're available everywhere you get your podcasts as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just want to give you guys a heads up. Be sure to tune into tomorrow's episode. We're going to talk about, three things to have hope going into next season. We're gonna so just be sure to stay locked in to Locked On Coyotes. In the meantime, don't forget to interact with us on social media. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/Locked On Coyotes, and on Twitter at LO_Coyotes. I'm personally at Robyn_Leano. Carl Pavlock is at 5 for Howling. Interact with us, ask a question you might have. We might answer right back or on a future episode of the Locked On Coyotes podcast. Thanks again, everyone, for listening to today's episode. Hope you guys are staying safe out there. Hope you guys are staying healthy. And don't forget to howl on.